There is something quietly unsettling about being raised on the promise that the world would open its doors to you, only to discover later that most of those doors were never unlocked to begin with. For many people born between the early 1980s and the mid-1990s, this realization didn't arrive as a single moment of disappointment, but as a slow, grinding awareness that life was not unfolding the way it was supposed to. Millennials were told, repeatedly and sincerely, that they were special, capable, and destined for meaningful success. That message wasn't vanity-driven, it was the language of an era that believed confidence was the cure for limitation. Yet confidence alone cannot carry a generation through an economic reality that quietly changed the rules while no one was looking. This is where the psychological tension begins, and it is deeper than financial frustration. At Reverse Mind Hub, this tension is worth examining because it reveals how expectations shape identity in ways we rarely question until something breaks. Millennials became the first generation in modern Western history to be statistically likely to do worse financially than their parents. This is not a matter of perception or attitude, it is a documented shift. When a generation grows up assuming progress is linear, that effort naturally leads to stability, and then finds itself moving backward despite doing everything right, the mind struggles to reconcile those opposing truths. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, but lived experience makes it feel more like quiet confusion that never fully resolves. You work hard, you educate yourself, you follow the script, and still the outcome feels smaller than promised. Over time, that gap between effort and reward stops feeling temporary and starts feeling personal. What complicates this further is the emotional blueprint millennials were given in childhood. They were raised during the height of the self-esteem movement, when encouragement was abundant and failure was softened. Parents and educators genuinely believed they were protecting children from the harshness of the world by reinforcing their worth at every turn. The intention was kindness, but the unintended effect was fragility when reality finally arrived unfiltered. When millennials entered adulthood, many did so during or just after the financial collapse of 2008, stepping into a job market that bore little resemblance to the one they had been prepared for. Degrees no longer guaranteed opportunity, loyalty no longer guaranteed security, and effort no longer guaranteed progress. The emotional whiplash of that transition left marks that are still visible today. Psychological research has often been misused to caricature millennials as narcissistic or entitled, but the data tells a more uncomfortable story. This generation scores higher not only in self-focus, but also in anxiety and depression. These traits are not contradictions, they are connected. Being told you are exceptional while being treated as expendable creates an identity that oscillates between confidence and self-doubt. You learn to market yourself aggressively while privately questioning your own worth. It is a trauma response that looks functional on the outside and exhausted on the inside. Social media intensified this dynamic at exactly the wrong moment. Millennials did not grow up entirely online, but they came of age as the internet became a stage rather than a tool. They learned how to be adults while also learning how to perform adulthood. Achievements were documented, relationships were curated, and comparison became unavoidable. When self-worth is measured in visibility and approval, the nervous system never fully rests. There is always another milestone to display, another version of success to chase, another reminder that someone else appears to be further along. Over time, that constant self-monitoring erodes the internal sense of enough. At the same time, traditional markers of adulthood became increasingly out of reach. Home ownership, stable careers, marriage, and parenthood were delayed not by lack of desire, but by lack of feasibility. Many millennials still want these things deeply, yet they find themselves waiting for conditions that never quite materialize. This prolonged waiting creates a psychological state of suspended identity. When society defines adulthood by milestones you cannot realistically access, you begin to feel as though your life has not properly started, even as years pass. Chronic uncertainty activates a stress response that the body was never meant to sustain indefinitely.
It's like being permanently braced for impact that never comes, a loading screen that never finishes. Underlying all of this is a broken social contract. Millennials were sold a straightforward equation: work hard, play by the rules, and you will be rewarded with stability. When that equation failed, it didn't just disappoint individuals, it disrupted an entire generation's belief in how the world functions. Psychologists refer to this as schema disruption, when deeply held assumptions about fairness, progress, and predictability collapse. The result is a generation that remains idealistic about how things should be, yet deeply skeptical that they ever will be. This is not hypocrisy, it is pattern recognition shaped by lived experience. Work culture offers another revealing example. Millennials are often criticized for job hopping or lacking loyalty, but this behavior mirrors the environment they entered. Companies normalized layoffs, replaced pensions with uncertainty, and reframed security as a personal responsibility rather than an institutional one. Adapting to instability is not moral failure, it is psychological survival. When commitment is no longer reciprocated, flexibility becomes rational. Despite these pressures, millennials have also reshaped important cultural conversations. They are among the most educated and diverse generations, and they approach information with skepticism earned through exposure to conflicting narratives. They question systems not because they want to dismantle everything, because they have seen how often authority fails to protect those who trust it blindly. This critical stance is frequently misread as entitlement, yet it is rooted in awareness rather than arrogance. Mental health is another area where millennials have quietly shifted the landscape. They were the first generation to widely name anxiety, depression, and burnout as experiences rather than personal shortcomings. This openness is not weakness, it is adaptive honesty. However, it exists alongside mounting pressures that make mental well-being harder to maintain. Debt, housing insecurity, job instability, and global crises create conditions that would strain any psyche, regardless of emotional literacy. Then there is the future itself. Millennials are the first generation to grow up with the persistent awareness that the planet's stability is not guaranteed. Climate anxiety is no longer abstract, it is woven into long-term decision-making, family planning, and hope itself. Being told you must fix a world you did not break, without the power or resources to do so, creates a unique blend of responsibility and helplessness that weighs heavily on the nervous system. When all of these forces converge, the psychological profile of millennials becomes remarkably predictable. They're not failing to thrive because they are flawed. They are responding normally to prolonged instability, broken promises, and constant pressure to adapt without rest. When the map you were given no longer matches the terrain beneath your feet, confusion is not a defect, it is a signal. Understanding this is not about defending a generation, but about recognizing what happens to human minds when the ground shifts and no one updates the instructions.